Rain fell mercilessly on the cemetery as I stood frozen, staring at my son Michael's casket being lowered into the ground. The hollow sound of water hitting the polished wood seemed to echo the emptiness spreading through my chest. At 66, I never imagined I would outlive my only child, Scarlett. I barely registered my husband Richard's voice beside me. After 35 years of marriage, I could sense something different in his tone. A coldness I'd never heard before, not even during our worst arguments. "We need to talk," he said, his hand gripping my elbow with unusual firmness. The mourners had begun to disperse, black umbrellas bobbing away like crows taking flight. My sister Jane lingered nearby, her concerned eyes fixed on us, but Richard steered me toward our car, away from anyone who might overhear. "This seems inappropriate, Richard," I whispered, my voice raw from days of crying. "We've just buried our son." "That's precisely why this is the perfect time," he replied, his voice eerily calm as he reached into his suit jacket. The rain pounded against the car windows as Richard handed me a manila envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper inside almost slipping from my grasp. Divorce papers. My name was already filled in. I looked up at him, searching for any sign of the man I'd spent most of my life with. His face was impassive, almost smug. The wrinkles around his eyes that once creased when he laughed now seemed like harsh lines carved by a different person altogether. "What is this?" I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Richard's lips curved into what I could only describe as a smile. "Now that Michael is gone, nothing ties me to you anymore. I'm taking over his business, and his house legally belongs to me now." The words hit me like physical blows. Our son's funeral hadn't even ended, and here was my husband, discarding me like an outdated appliance. "You can stay at the house until I return from my vacation," he continued, starting the car. "I'll be gone for 3 weeks. Consider it a grace period." "Vacation?" I repeated numbly. "Our son just died, Richard." He shrugged, pulling out of the cemetery without a backward glance at our son's grave. "Life goes on, Scarlett. Mine will go on without you." I stared at his profile, the face I'd woken up next to for over 3 decades. How had I missed the stranger lurking beneath the familiar features? "Why now?" I managed to ask as we drove through the rain-soaked streets. "Why today of all days?" Richard's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Because I've waited long enough." His voice dropped to a near whisper. 35 years is a lifetime sentence. I've served my time. My mind raced through our years together, raising Michael, building our life, the small business we'd started that our son had eventually taken over and transformed into a successful enterprise. Had Richard been unhappy all this time? Had I been blind to his resentment? "Where will I go?" I asked, shocking myself with the smallness of my voice. "That's not my problem anymore," he replied. "You're smart, Scarlett. You'll figure something out." When we arrived home, Michael's home, where we'd moved to help him after his wife left him 3 years ago, Richard immediately went upstairs to pack. I sat in the kitchen, the divorce papers spread before me, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound breaking the silence. My son was dead. My husband wanted me gone. At 66, the life I'd known had crumbled within a week. That night, as Richard slept in the guest room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My grief for Michael was a physical pain, a hollowness that seemed to consume me from within. But now another emotion began to surface, a quiet, simmering anger. I thought about the phone call I'd received just 3 days before Michael's car accident. He had sounded anxious, asking to meet me privately to discuss something important about Dad and the business. We'd planned to meet for lunch the following week, a lunch that never happened. The next morning, I watched Richard pack his suitcase into his car. He handed me a house key. "I'll be back in 3 weeks, he said flatly. "Have your things out by then." As his car disappeared down the driveway, I stood in the doorway, still wearing the robe I'd had for over a decade, the robe he'd given me for Christmas years ago. I walked slowly back into the house, my son's house, feeling like a ghost. In the kitchen, I noticed Richard had left his coffee mug in the sink. 35 years, and he still expected me to clean up after him. I picked up the mug, my thumb tracing the faded logo of our original family business. That's when I remembered the safe. Michael's safe, hidden in his office closet. The safe where he kept important documents. The safe whose combination he'd shared with me, just in case. A precaution after his divorce. A quiet voice in my head whispered that I should look inside. That perhaps whatever Michael wanted to tell me might be found there. That maybe, just maybe, there was more to Richard's sudden betrayal than I understood. With trembling hands, I made my way to Michael's office. The room still smelled like him, a faint trace of the cologne I'd given him last Christmas. The last Christmas we would ever share. I slid open the closet door and pushed aside the hanging suits that Michael would never wear again. The safe was behind them, mounted to the wall. My fingers fumbled with the dial as I entered the combination. The door swung open. Inside, on top of a stack of folders, lay a sealed envelope with a single word written across it in my son's handwriting. Mom. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope with my name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. For several moments, I couldn't bring myself to open it, afraid of what secrets my son might have kept from me. Finally, I took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a letter and a small USB drive. I unfolded the pages, my heart pounding against my ribs as I began to read. Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, or I've finally gathered the courage to tell you the truth. I've been debating for months whether to burden you with this knowledge, but you deserve to know. Dad has been systematically draining money from the business for the past 2 years. At first, I thought they were accounting errors, but I've confirmed he's been moving substantial sums to private accounts. I confronted him 3 months ago, and he claimed it was for a surprise retirement plan for both of you. I wanted to believe him, but something felt wrong. I hired a private investigator who discovered Dad has purchased a beachfront property in Costa Rica under his name only. He's also been meeting regularly with Diane Miller, his former secretary. The USB drive contains copies of all the financial records I've gathered, including transfers to overseas accounts. I've also included recordings of conversations with Dad where he made alarming statements about starting fresh once he cuts ties with the past. I don't know what he's planning, but I'm worried about you. Please be careful. I'm meeting with our attorney next week to discuss options for protecting what's left of the company and your future. I love you, Mom. Whatever happens, remember, you're stronger than you think. Michael. I read the letter 3 times, each word making the floor beneath me feel increasingly unstable. The Michael I knew had always been honest to a fault, sometimes painfully so. If he believed Richard was capable of this level of deception, there was likely truth to it. With shaking hands, I plugged the USB drive into Michael's computer. File after file of bank statements, property deeds, and email correspondences opened before my eyes. I'm not a financial expert, but even I could see the patterns. Money moving from our family business to accounts I'd never known existed. Then I opened an audio file. Michael's voice came through the speakers, followed by Richard's. Dad, these transfers don't make sense for tax purposes. Where is this money actually going? You're looking at this all wrong, son. I've worked my entire life building this business. I'm entitled to securing my future. Your future? What about Mom's future? This is her legacy too. Your mother has always been content to let others make decisions. That won't change now. The coldness in Richard's voice made me recoil. There were more recordings, snippets of conversations where my husband discussed freedom and new beginnings, with an eagerness that turned my stomach. As morning turned to afternoon, I sat in Michael's office piecing together the truth. Richard hadn't just suddenly decided to leave me. He'd been planning it meticulously for years. Our son had discovered his betrayal and might have paid the ultimate price for it. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Was Michael's car accident truly an accident? I pushed the horrifying idea away. Even Richard couldn't be capable of that. Could he? I slumped back in the chair, overwhelmed. What was I supposed to do with this information? Go to the police? Confront Richard? At 66, I'd never imagined having to untangle such treachery, especially not while mourning my child. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Jane. Checking on you. Can I come by? Jane had always been my rock, the practical one who faced life's challenges head-on while I tended to smooth over conflicts. I needed her clarity now more than ever. Please come. I texted back. While waiting for Jane, I explored more of Michael's files. There were photos of Richard with a woman I recognized as Diane Miller, his former secretary who was 20 years my junior. They weren't explicitly romantic images, just lunch meetings and coffee dates, but the familiarity in their body language told its own story. When Jane arrived, her expression shifted from sympathy to alarm as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Scarlett, what's happened?" she asked, guiding me to the living room sofa. I handed her Michael's letter without a word. Her eyes widened as she read, muttering curses under her breath. "That bastard," she finally said, looking up at me. "I always thought Richard was controlling, but this is criminal." "What do I do, Jane?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "I don't even know where to begin." Jane squared her shoulders in that decisive way I'd always envied. "First, we make copies of everything. Then we call Martin." Martin was Jane's son-in-law, a well-respected attorney who specialized in financial crimes. The mention of legal action made everything suddenly feel very real. "I don't know if I can handle a legal battle, Jane. Not after losing Michael." "Listen to me," Jane said, taking my hands. "Richard is counting on you being too devastated and too passive to fight back. That's why he chose this moment to strike. But you need to protect yourself." I nodded slowly, remembering Michael's words. "You're stronger than you think." Over the next few days, Jane practically moved in with me. Together with Martin, we meticulously documented everything on the USB drive. Martin's face grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the evidence. "Scarlett, Richard has been emptying company accounts and moving assets out of the country," he explained during one of our meetings. "Based on what I'm seeing, he's been planning this exit for at least 3 years." "3 years?" I echoed. "That's around when Michael's wife left and we moved in to help him." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "Richard may have accelerated his plans once he had direct access to Michael's home and business records." Jane, who had been pacing the room, stopped abruptly. "What about Michael's accident? Could Richard have—" "No," I interrupted, unable to consider the possibility. "He couldn't do that." Martin's expression remained carefully neutral. "At this point, we should focus on securing your financial future. The rest, well, we'll cross that bridge if evidence leads us there." 1 week after Richard's departure, I found myself doing something I never imagined. Meeting with a forensic accountant and a private investigator. The woman Richard had left behind, the accommodating wife who avoided confrontation, was being replaced by someone willing to fight. That evening, as I was sorting through some of Michael's personal belongings in his bedroom, I found a small leather journal tucked between his mattress and box spring. Inside were detailed notes about his suspicions regarding Richard, dates of unusual financial activities, and observations about Richard's behavior. The last entry, dated just 2 days before the accident, sent a chill down my spine. Dad seemed agitated when I mentioned the Costa Rica property today. Said I was imagining things, but his hands were shaking. When I pressed about the overseas transfers, he made a strange comment. "Some obstacles can't be negotiated with." Not sure what he meant, but something in his eyes scared me. Meeting with Mom next week. She needs to know everything. I sat on the edge of Michael's bed, my son's journal clutched to my chest, a cold realization washing over me. The obstacle Richard couldn't negotiate with was Michael's discovery of his plans. And now, our son was gone. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Scarlett Barrett?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes, speaking. My name is Cynthia Wells. I worked with your son at the accounting firm before he took over the family business. I think we need to talk. There's something you should know about your husband and your son's accident." My breath caught in my throat. "What about my son's accident?" Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "It wasn't an accident, Mrs. Barrett, and I can prove it." "We shouldn't meet at your house," Cynthia Wells insisted over the phone. "I don't think it's safe." Her words sent a chill through me. The idea that my own home, my son's home, might not be safe was yet another layer to this nightmare. "There's a small cafe on Maple Street, Rosie's Corner," she continued. "Can you meet me there tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Sit in the back booth near the emergency exit?" After agreeing, I hung up and immediately called Jane. Her practical voice was my anchor in the storm. "I'm coming with you," she declared after I explained the call. "And I'm bringing Martin. This is beyond suspicious." That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, my mind racing between grief for Michael and terror at what I might learn tomorrow. Had Richard, the man who'd slept beside me for 35 years, the father of my child, actually been capable of murder? The next morning, Jane picked me up early. She'd aged well into her 70s, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her movements still decisive. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "One step at a time, Liz," she murmured. "Whatever we learn today, you're not alone." Rosie's Corner was a cozy establishment that had been a fixture in our community for decades. I'd celebrated birthdays there, had countless coffees with friends, and once, long ago, Richard had proposed to me in that very cafe. The memory felt like it belonged to another woman's life. We arrived early. Martin, Jane's son-in-law, was already waiting outside, tall and distinguished in his navy suit. His presence gave me a sense of protection I desperately needed. "I'll order coffees and sit at a nearby table," he said after we entered. Close enough to hear, but not so close as to make her nervous. Jane and I slid into the back booth. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, so I clasped them around a mug of tea, hoping the warmth would steady them. At precisely 10 a.m., a slim woman in her 30s with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun approached our table. Her eyes darted nervously around the cafe before she sat down. "Mrs. Barrett?" she asked quietly. When I nodded, she continued, "Thank you for meeting me. I've been debating whether to come forward since it happened. You said Michael's death wasn't an accident," I prompted when she hesitated. Cynthia reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. "I was Michael's assistant at the accounting firm for 3 years before he left to take over your family business. He trusted me, which is why he reached out when he found irregularities." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were more financial documents, but also something I hadn't seen before: photographs of Michael's car after the accident. "Michael asked me to keep copies of everything in case something happened to his records," she explained. "But it's not just the financial evidence that's concerning." She pointed to the accident photos. "Look at the brake line. See this clean cut? That's not consistent with an accident or normal wear and tear." Jane leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Are you suggesting the brake line was deliberately cut?" Cynthia nodded grimly. "The police report listed it as a tragic accident, brake failure on a curve. But Michael had his car serviced just 2 weeks before. He was meticulous about maintenance." My chest tightened. "Did you take this to the police?" "I tried," she said, lowering her voice. "I spoke to Detective Ramirez, but the next day my apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken except my laptop and the original copies of these documents. The implications hung heavily in the air. If Richard had orchestrated Michael's accident, how far would he go to cover his tracks? There's more," Cynthia continued. "The night before his accident, Michael called me. He was agitated, said he'd confronted your husband again about the missing funds. He told me Richard had made a threat, not directly but implied. Something about removing obstacles. The phrase matched what I'd read in Michael's journal. My stomach turned. "Why would Richard do this?" Jane asked, her voice tight with anger. "Michael was his son." Cynthia hesitated. "Money, partially. But I think it was also about control. From what Michael told me, your husband couldn't stand the idea of being exposed, especially by his own son." As she continued sharing details, a numbness spread through me. The Richard she described, calculating, ruthless, narcissistic, seemed a stranger to me. Yet glimpses of that man had always been there, hadn't they? The controlling behavior I'd dismissed as protectiveness. The financial decisions he'd made without consulting me, claiming I wouldn't understand the complexities. "What should I do?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible. Martin, who had been listening from nearby, joined our table. "First, we need to secure this evidence properly. Then we approach a different police department, maybe state investigators who won't be easily influenced if Richard has local connections." "You need to be careful," Cynthia warned. "If Richard realizes you're investigating, you could be in danger too." Her words should have terrified me, but instead, a strange calm descended. Michael was gone. Richard had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I had nothing left to lose. I've spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, I said slowly. Always smoothing things over, keeping the peace. But not anymore. That afternoon, Martin arranged for me to meet with a state investigator. Detective Sarah Blackwell was a no-nonsense woman with intelligent eyes and a reputation for integrity. She listened carefully as I presented the evidence, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Barrett, these allegations are extremely serious," she said when I finished. "Financial crimes are one thing, but vehicular homicide is another entirely. We'll need to move carefully." "Will you investigate Michael's accident?" I asked. She nodded. "We'll petition for the car to be re-examined and look into the financial angle as possible motive. But I need to be honest with you. Your husband has a 2-week head start. If he's left the country, he's coming back," I said with certainty. "In 3 weeks. He needs to officially take control of Michael's business and house. The transfer paperwork isn't complete." Detective Blackwell's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Then we have a window of opportunity." The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and police interviews. Jane insisted I stay with her rather than remain in Michael's house alone. "Just until we know you're safe," she argued. I didn't resist. The house held too many ghosts now. Michael's absence, Richard's betrayal, my own blind trust. 10 days after Richard's departure, I received an email from him. The first contact since he'd left me standing in the driveway. "Scarlett, I trust you're making arrangements as discussed. I'll return on the 27th and expect the house to be vacant except for my belongings. My lawyer will contact you regarding the final divorce settlement. I'm being more than generous considering the circumstances. Richard." No mention of our son. No acknowledgement of our shared grief. Just cold, practical details as if we were dissolving a business partnership rather than a 35-year marriage. I forwarded the email to Detective Blackwell, who confirmed they would have surveillance in place when Richard returned. But the waiting was unbearable. "You need something to focus on," Jane said one evening as we sat in her garden. "Something besides Richard and the investigation." She was right. I'd spent decades being Richard's wife, Michael's mother. Without those roles, who was I? The next morning, I drove to our original family business location, a small office building now owned by a real estate company. As I stood on the sidewalk looking at the place where Richard and I had started with such hope, a memory surfaced. Before marrying Richard, I'd been studying architecture. I'd abandoned my degree when we decided to start the business together, convinced by Richard that our joint venture needed my full attention. It had seemed a reasonable sacrifice at the time. On impulse, I drove to the local community college. The architecture program I'd once dreamed of completing no longer existed, but they did offer courses in interior design and space planning. "Our continuing education programs are quite popular with seniors," the admissions counselor told me, handing over a course catalog. "Classes start next month." I left with registration forms, and for the first time since Michael's death, a small spark of possibility. That evening, Jane found me at her dining table surrounded by course catalogs and financial paperwork. "What's all this?" she asked. "I'm planning," I replied, looking up. "For after." She nodded in approval. "Good. Richard doesn't get to determine your future." 2 days before Richard's scheduled return, Detective Blackwell called with an update. "We've made progress, Mrs. Barrett. The forensic examination of Michael's car confirmed tampering with the brake line, and we've tracked some of the missing funds to an account in Panama." My heart raced. "So you can arrest Richard when he returns?" "We're building the case," she said cautiously. "But we need to be strategic. Your husband is coming back believing he's won. People are careless when they think they're untouchable." "What do you need from me?" I asked. There was a pause before she answered. "We'd like to wire your house, audio surveillance, and we need you to meet with Richard when he returns." Fear gripped me at the thought of facing Richard, knowing what I now knew. "You want me to confront him?" "Not exactly," she replied. "We want you to play along, make him think you're defeated, compliant. The more comfortable he feels, the more likely he is to incriminate himself." Could I do it? Could I face the man who had possibly murdered our son and pretend I knew nothing? I'll need to think about it, I said finally. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered Jane's house restlessly, eventually finding myself in her study looking at old family photographs. There was Michael at his high school graduation, his arm around me, Richard standing proudly on his other side. There we were at the grand opening of our first business location, cutting a ribbon together, our faces alight with possibility. Had Richard been planning his escape even then? Had our entire life together been a calculation on his part? In the early hours of the morning, I made my decision. I would meet with Richard. I would look into the eyes of the man who had shared my bed for 35 years and possibly taken our son's life. I would find the truth, whatever it cost. I called Detective Blackwell at first light. I'll do it, I told her. I'll meet with Richard when he returns. Are you certain? She asked. It could be dangerous. I'm certain, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. It's time I stopped hiding from confrontation. We arranged for technicians to set up surveillance in Michael's house the following day. The plan was for me to return there, making it appear as if I'd never left, as if I were still the same passive Scarlet that Richard expected to find. As the day of Richard's return drew closer, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Detective Blackwell had coached me on what to say and how to behave. Play vulnerable, appear defeated, don't push for information. The night before Richard's scheduled arrival, I returned to Michael's house. It felt different now, knowing it was under surveillance, knowing that in less than 24 hours, I would come face to face with a man I no longer recognized. I moved through the quiet rooms, touching Michael's belongings, drawing strength from the memory of my son. In his office, I opened the safe once more and removed a small item I'd discovered among his personal effects, a voice recorder disguised as a pen. Detective Blackwell had her official surveillance, but I wanted my own insurance. That night, I slept in Michael's room, surrounded by his things. As dawn broke, I stood before the mirror studying my reflection. A 66-year-old woman with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes. But behind that familiar face, I saw something new emerging. Determination. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Flight landed early. We'll be home in 1 hour. Have your things ready. Our Richard was returning sooner than expected. I texted Detective Blackwell immediately, my hands trembling slightly. Her response came quickly. Stay calm. Officers in position. Remember the plan. I dressed carefully in clothes Richard would expect. Conservative, understated. I activated the pen recorder and slipped it into my pocket. Then I sat in the living room, waiting, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. At precisely 8:17 a.m., I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. He was home. The sound of Richard's key in the lock sent my heart racing. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, the picture of submission he would expect. The recording pen weighed heavy in my pocket. He entered with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Tanned from his vacation, he looked younger, more vital than when he'd left. The contrast between his sun-kissed appearance and my grief-worn face couldn't have been starker. "Scarlet," he said, nodding curtly as he set down his suitcase. "I see you're still here." "I needed time to make arrangements," I replied, my voice carefully modulated to hide the rage simmering beneath. Richard moved through the living room, examining things, touching Michael's possessions with a proprietary air that made my skin crawl. "Have you signed the divorce papers?" "Not yet." I kept my eyes downcast, playing the role of the defeated wife. "Richard, I still don't understand. After 35 years, why now? Why on the day we buried our son?" He sighed with exaggerated patience. "There's never a good time for these things. Michael's passing simply accelerated my timeline." "Your timeline?" I echoed, letting a tremor enter my voice. "You had this planned all along?" Richard poured himself a drink from Michael's bar cabinet, his movements casual, unhurried. "Let's just say I've been considering my options for some time. Now, about your departure, did those options include hurting Michael?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His hand paused mid-air, the glass halfway to his lips. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even fear. Then his expression smoothed over. What an absurd question. His voice was measured, controlled. Our son died in a tragic accident. I'm grieving too, Scarlett. I watched him sip his drink. Not a hint of that alleged grief visible on his face. Michael told me he was concerned about the business finances. He wanted to meet with me about it. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Michael always was overly cautious. There was nothing to be concerned about. Then why move funds to Panama? I asked quietly. The glass froze at his lips. Slowly he lowered it, his eyes hardening as they met mine. What exactly are you implying, Scarlett? I found Michael's records, I said, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The transfers, the Costa Rica property, the meetings with Diane. Richard set his glass down with deliberate care. You've been going through my things? Michael's things, I corrected. He kept copies of everything, including records of your conversations where you talked about removing obstacles. He laughed, but the sound lacked humor. You're confused, Scarlett. Grief has clouded your judgment. The brake line on Michael's car was cut. I kept my voice steady, watching his reaction closely. It wasn't an accident. For the first time, Richard looked genuinely unsettled. He glanced toward the windows, then back at me. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. The police are reinvestigating. The police? His voice rose slightly. You've been talking to the police? I nodded, feeling a strange power in the fear that flashed across his face. They're very interested in the financial records, too. The timing of the transfers, especially those that happened right after Michael's death. Richard's composure cracked. He slammed his glass down, amber liquid sloshing over the edges. You have no idea what you're doing. No idea who you're dealing with. I think I do, I replied, standing up slowly. I'm dealing with a man who spent decades pretending to be someone he wasn't. A man who valued money and control over his own family. He moved toward me, his face contorted with anger. You think you can threaten me? After all these years of me carrying you? You'd be nothing without me, Scarlett. Nothing. Did you kill our son, Richard? I asked, the direct question hanging in the air between us. He stopped, his breathing heavy. You've lost your mind. Answer the question. Did you tamper with Michael's car because he discovered what you were doing? A dangerous smile spread across his face. Prove it. In that moment, looking into the cold eyes of the stranger before me, I realized the extent of my blindness. This man, this monster, had shared my life for 35 years, and I had never truly known him. Why? I whispered. He was your son. He was becoming a problem, Richard hissed, stepping closer. Just like you're becoming a problem now. I backed away instinctively. The police know I'm here, Richard. Detective Blackwell is expecting my call. He laughed. Your word against mine, Scarlett. Who do you think they'll believe? The respected businessman or the emotionally fragile widow? They'll believe the evidence, I replied, reaching into my pocket. Richard's eyes widened as I pulled out the recording pen. You recorded this? Before I could respond, he lunged for it. I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm with bruising force, spinning me around. His face was transformed by rage, all pretense of civility gone. Give me that, he snarled, reaching for the pen. We struggled, his strength surprising me. The pen fell from my grasp, skittering across the hardwood floor. Richard shoved me aside, sending me sprawling as he moved to retrieve it. It's over, Richard, I managed, trying to regain my footing. He towered over me, the pen clutched in his fist. You're right about that. As he advanced toward me, his intent clear in his eyes, the front door burst open. Detective Blackwell entered, weapon drawn, flanked by 2 officers. Richard Barrett, you're under arrest for the murder of Michael Barrett and financial fraud, she announced. Richard froze, his face a mask of disbelief. This is ridiculous. She's setting me up. As the officers handcuffed him, Detective Blackwell helped me to my feet. Are you all right, Mrs. Barrett? I nodded, watching as the stranger who had been my husband for 35 years was led away, still protesting his innocence. We heard everything through the surveillance, she assured me, and we have the financial records. He won't get away with this. As Richard was escorted past me, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "This isn't over, Scarlett." But looking into his eyes, I knew it was. The power he had held over me for decades had evaporated. Standing in the doorway of my son's home, watching the police car drive away with Richard in the back seat, I felt something unexpected amid the grief and trauma. Freedom. My phone rang. "Jane." "It's done," I told her. "They've arrested him." "Thank God," she breathed. "Come home now, Liz. You've done enough for today." As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on a photograph of Michael on the side table. My beautiful boy, smiling brightly, unaware of the betrayal that awaited him. "I did it, Michael," I whispered to his image. "But this is just the beginning." Little did I know how right I was. Richard's final threat wasn't empty. He had one last devastating secret that would turn my world upside down yet again. The weeks following Richard's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, meetings with prosecutors, and legal paperwork. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, was denied bail, deemed both a flight risk and a potential threat to me. The evidence against him mounted. Forensic proof of tampering with Michael's car, financial records showing systematic theft, and most damning of all, his own recorded confession. Yet amid the chaos, I found moments of unexpected peace. Jane had become my constant companion, her steadfast presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. Martin handled the legal complexities with compassion and skill, shielding me from the worst of it. 1 month after Richard's arrest, I was sorting through Michael's papers when Detective Blackwell called. "Mrs. Barrett, we found something you should know about," she said, her voice unusually gentle. "Could you come to the station tomorrow?" The next morning, Jane drove me there, her hand squeezing mine reassuringly as we entered the building. Detective Blackwell led us to a private conference room where a middle-aged man in a suit waited. "This is Nathan Reynolds from the Insurance Fraud Division," she introduced. "Mrs. Barrett," he began, "in the course of investigating your husband's finances, we discovered several life insurance policies. 3, to be exact." I nodded. Michael and Richard both had policies. Standard practice for business owners. "Yes, but there's a third policy we believe you weren't aware of," Reynolds continued. "A policy on your life, taken out by your husband 5 years ago." The words hung in the air as their meaning sank in. "The payout is substantial, $2 million, he added. "But I'm alive," I said, confusion clouding my thoughts. Detective Blackwell leaned forward. "We believe that was about to change, Mrs. Barrett. Your husband returned early from his trip, before our surveillance was fully in place. In his luggage, we found a vial of potassium chloride, untraceable in an autopsy if administered correctly. It would have appeared like a heart attack." The room tilted momentarily. Jane's arm went around my shoulders. "His plan was comprehensive," Reynolds continued. "After Michael discovered the financial irregularities, Richard accelerated his timeline. He needed to eliminate Michael, divorce you, and then stage my death," I finished, the horrifying truth crystallizing. "To collect the insurance before disappearing to Costa Rica. My son hadn't been the only target. I had been next." Later that evening, sitting in Jane's garden, I felt strangely calm. The enormity of Richard's betrayal had reached a point where additional revelations no longer had the power to shock me. "What will you do now?" Jane asked, handing me a cup of tea. I looked up at the evening sky, watching as stars began to appear. Live. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood outside the courthouse where Richard's trial had just concluded. The verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. The sentence: life without parole. I hadn't attended the sentencing. I didn't need to see Richard's face again or hear his voice. Instead, I'd chosen to spend the day at the community college where I was now taking courses in interior design. At 66, I was the oldest student in most of my classes, but I found an unexpected joy in learning again. My first project, redesigning a community center for domestic violence survivors, had received the highest grade in the class. As I walked across the campus, phone calls and messages of support poured in. The insurance money from Michael's policy had been released now that the trial was over. Combined with my portion of the business assets that had been recovered, I had more financial security than I'd ever expected at this stage of life. But it wasn't money that gave me purpose. It was the future I was building, a future Richard had never imagined I was capable of creating. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my new apartment. Jane was there, along with Martin and his family. Cynthia Wells came too, the brave young woman whose testimony had been crucial in Richard's conviction. Detective Blackwell stopped by briefly, bringing a bottle of wine and a genuine smile. "To Michael," I said, raising my glass in toast, "who protected me even after he was gone. And to you, Scarlett," Jane added, "who found the courage to fight back." As my guests chatted around me, I slipped away to the balcony. Below, the city lights twinkled against the gathering darkness. Somewhere in those lights were other women trapped in relationships built on control and deception. Women who, like me, might one day need to find their voice and their strength. In the morning, I would meet with a foundation that supported older women rebuilding their lives after loss or divorce. They'd asked me to share my story, to help others who might be facing similar challenges. My story. Not as Richard's wife, or even as Michael's mother, but as Scarlett Barrett, a woman who, at 66, had finally discovered who she truly was. The night air was cool against my skin as I looked up at the stars. For the first time in decades, the future wasn't something to fear or endure. It was something to embrace.